He once controlled millions with a single phone call. His name echoed through the marble halls of Manhattan's most powerful financial institutions. But today, his voice trembles inside a rehab center, far from the trading floors that once worshipped him. What happened to the Wall Street prodigy who had it all? Wealth, status, and the illusion of invincibility. This is the story of Michael Grayson, a man who climbed too high, too fast, and fell harder than anyone imagined. The year was 1998, and the air in Lower Manhattan buzzed like a live wire. The dot-com boom had Wall Street drunk with opportunity. Stocks soared, fortunes were made and lost in a single afternoon. Inside a towering glass skyscraper on Broad Street, a 26-year-old broker named Michael Grayson was writing his name into the history of financial legends. He wasn't just another suit in a sea of ambition. He was the youngest partner ever at Darden & Cole, one of the most aggressive brokerage firms on the East Coast. Michael didn't come from money. He was born in Newark, New Jersey, the son of a school teacher and a warehouse worker. He was brilliant, yes, but what set him apart was the way he saw numbers as emotion. To Michael, market graphs were living things, pulsing with greed and fear, hope and panic. He knew when to strike, when to pull back, and most dangerously, when to bet it all. He landed his first big client at just 23, a pharmaceutical company CEO who liked Michael's cocky charm and total lack of fear. Within 6 months, that account ballooned into a multi-million-dollar portfolio. Promotions followed. Bonuses became obscene. Michael went from a tiny studio apartment in Queens to a penthouse overlooking Central Park, complete with Italian marble floors, a baby grand piano he never played, and a custom-built cigar humidor. He dressed like old money and partied like new money. Every Friday night he hosted rooftop gatherings where champagne flowed like tap water, and high-stakes poker games ended with Rolexes traded across the table. But under all the opulence, a darker rhythm pulsed through his life. The pressure to perform was relentless. One bad quarter and everything could vanish. To cope, Michael began taking Adderall, prescribed at first. Then came the occasional line of cocaine before a client pitch. Just to stay sharp, just to stay awake. The lines blurred. The drugs helped him focus, helped him win. Or so he told himself. His mentor, Harold Whitman, a crusty, sharp-tongued senior partner, warned him, "This game chews up the cocky ones, Grayson. It eats you, then forgets your name." Michael laughed it off. He wasn't going to be forgotten. He was different. He was better. In meetings, he was electric. Clients loved him. Interns idolized him. Reporters began calling him the Market Whisperer. One magazine even put him on the cover, Wall Street's Golden Prodigy. But for all his charisma and quick wins, Michael began making riskier trades, betting on untested tech companies, manipulating hype through insider tips whispered at exclusive dinners. He told himself it wasn't illegal, just aggressive strategy. Everyone bent the rules. Everyone played the game. And besides, he always delivered results. Then came the night he met Vanessa. She was unlike anyone else in his world, an art dealer from Soho, unimpressed by money, immune to charm. She challenged him, grounded him. For the first time, Michael considered a life beyond the markets. They married within a year. For a moment he felt complete, but Wall Street never sleeps. And Michael wasn't ready to walk away from its siren call. As his fortune grew, so did his addiction. The Adderall turned to cocaine. The cocaine turned to something worse. He started disappearing for hours at a time, lying to Vanessa about meetings and travel. At work, his brilliance dimmed. Slightly, but no one dared question him. He was still the rainmaker, still untouchable. At least that's what he thought. Behind the scenes, the Securities and Exchange Commission had begun to take interest in Darden & Cole's trading patterns. Suspicious spikes, overvalued startups, anonymous complaints, and At the center of more than a dozen flagged transactions was Michael Grayson. But in 1998, none of that mattered yet. For now, Michael was still the king. He just didn't realize the countdown had already begun. Michael Grayson's rise had been meteoric, but meteors burn brightest before they crash. By the year 2000, his name alone could move markets. Financial TV pundits speculated about his trades. Twitter was still years away, but within elite trading circles, Michael's bets were gospel. His desk was surrounded by sycophants, junior brokers who mimicked his every word, laughed at his cruel jokes, and watched in awe as he pulled seven-figure deals from thin air. He was untouchable, or so it seemed. His office, glass-walled and perched like a throne, was filled with trophies of conquest. Golf clubs he never used, bottles of single malt he never drank, a custom-built Bloomberg terminal that blinked with constant market data. But the real power wasn't in the tech or the numbers. It was in Michael's sheer confidence. He believed with every fiber of his being that the rules didn't apply to him. That belief, more than the drugs, would become his downfall. First, the manipulation was subtle. He'd nudge a startup CEO to delay bad news until after a scheduled IPO. He'd pass a tip to a journalist at just the right moment to generate hype. Nothing technically illegal, just strategic. But then came the shell companies. Michael began investing heavily in thinly traded stocks, small-cap tech firms with vague business models and big promises. He'd quietly buy up millions of shares, then unleash his network to pump up the price through well-placed leaks, orchestrated interviews, and falsified momentum. Once the stocks soared, he'd dump them, fast. It was textbook pump and dump. And it was wildly profitable. He called it liquidity optimization. The drugs were no longer just tools to stay alert. They became a lifestyle. Cocaine kept him sharp. Xanax took the edge off. Ambien knocked him out. He was a walking pharmacy. He kept a private doctor on call, and his assistants knew never to question the small black case he carried everywhere. Vanessa, once the love of his life, had become a stranger in their penthouse. She noticed the mood swings, the lies, the stubble from nights he never came home. She asked questions. Michael deflected. She cried. He left. The distance between them became a canyon. One night after a particularly wild celebration following a $12 million quarterly bonus, Michael disappeared for 36 hours. He woke up in a hotel room in Atlantic City, shirtless, bruised, and alone. There were bloodstains on the sheets, a broken lamp. He didn't remember any of it. He called Vanessa. She didn't answer. That night, she moved out, still. The machine rolled on. He had new women, new drugs, new trades. But something had changed. His instincts faltered. A few deals went sour. A major client accused him of front-running trades. One of his junior brokers quit suddenly and left behind an encrypted hard drive. Michael barely noticed, but the regulators did. The SEC opened a quiet investigation, requesting transaction histories and communications. Michael's assistant flagged it, but he dismissed the warning. "They sniff around every time someone gets rich fast," he said, laughing. "Let them." But in private, he was sweating. He started deleting emails, ordering staff to use burner phones. Paranoia crept in. He began accusing friends of betrayal, firing longtime allies on a whim. His empire, built on charm and illusion, was starting to rot from within. One late evening, alone in his office, Michael stared at a market graph for nearly an hour without moving. He was high, very high, but beneath the drug haze was a gnawing truth. He had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. He didn't just bend the rules anymore, he'd shattered them. And now someone was watching. The chapter was closing. But he didn't know it yet. What do you think of Michael's choices so far? Was he always destined to fall, or did he still have a chance to turn back? Let us know in the comments below. It happened on a Thursday. Michael had just returned from a weekend in the Bahamas, where he had hosted a private investor retreat filled with sun, scotch, and superficial handshakes. His tan was perfect, his mood elevated, and his voicemail full. As he stepped into the Darden & Cole office that morning, he was met not with admiration, but with silence. Not just the usual early morning hush. A loaded, tense silence. The kind that presses against your ribs. His secretary wouldn't meet his eyes, his Bloomberg terminal wouldn't load, and the firm's managing partner, an ice-blooded man named Charles Denham, was waiting in his office, not smiling. "What's going on?" Michael asked, forcing a grin. Denham slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed emails, call logs, transaction records. "Someone's been talking," Denham said flatly. "There's a whistleblower. The SEC's building a case, and it looks like you're their centerpiece." Michael's mouth dried instantly. Before he could respond, a team of federal agents stormed the floor. Suits and badges. A flash of cameras from the hallway. Dozens of stunned employees watched as Michael Grayson, the golden prodigy, was handcuffed at his own desk. The charges were serious: securities fraud, insider trading, market manipulation, wire fraud. His face was on every news channel before. He reached the holding cell. Clients panicked. Some sued. Others pulled their money and ran. Darden & Cole distanced themselves instantly, issuing statements that branded Michael a rogue actor and solely responsible for all violations. His name was stripped from the company website within 24 hours. Vanessa, watching the news alone in her new apartment, didn't cry. She'd already buried the man she once married. The bail was astronomical. Michael posted it anyway, selling 2 cars and borrowing from a former college roommate. He returned to a penthouse that now felt like a museum of someone else's life. Empty, echoing, and eerily still. The drugs took over. With his career in ruins and his reputation reduced to a Twitter punchline, Michael dove headfirst into addiction. He stopped answering his lawyer's calls. His housekeeper quit after finding him passed out on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken glass and blood from a self-inflicted cut. It wasn't a suicide attempt, just another night gone wrong. The trial date loomed. Tabloids tore him apart. "From genius to junkie," one headline screamed. "Wall Street's Icarus," read another. He was the villain of the moment, and the public wanted blood. But the real damage wasn't in court. It was in his own mind. Michael began hallucinating. Old trades. He'd wake in the middle of the night and check phantom market alerts. He spoke to dead clients. He'd pace his living room ranting about short interest ratios and volatility plays that didn't exist. His doctor called it drug-induced psychosis. The final blow came from an unlikely source. His father. Old, frail, and ashamed, he showed up unannounced, stood in the center of Michael's once luxurious living room and said, "You could have been anything. You chose this." Then he turned and left. The next day, Michael collapsed in an alley behind a nightclub. He was revived by paramedics, half-conscious and barely breathing. When he woke up in the hospital, handcuffed to the bed, a young public defender sat beside him and said, "The judge is offering a deal. Rehab instead of prison. But this is your last shot, Michael. If you screw this up, you're done." It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something. Maybe. The rehab facility was nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains, silent, sterile, and far removed from the chaos of Wall Street. The air smelled of pine and antiseptic. It was the kind of place where time stopped. Michael Grayson arrived wearing a crumpled suit, his belt and shoelaces confiscated at check-in, his mind a swirling fog of withdrawal and confusion. He was no longer the market whisperer. He was just another patient in room 208. The first week was hell. Michael's body rejected sobriety like poison. He shook uncontrollably, vomited for hours, hallucinated market crashes, and imagined news headlines that didn't exist. He screamed in his sleep, muttering ticker symbols and numbers that only made sense to the ghosts in his head. Nurses restrained him twice. On the third day, he tried to walk out barefoot in the snow, insisting he had one last trade to execute. They sedated him. He woke up 3 days later, face pale, lips cracked, but for the first time in years, sober. The facility ran on routine. Wake up, group therapy, nutrition, meditation, journaling, no phones, no internet, no market updates, just silence. Just Michael and his demons. He resisted at first, laughed during therapy, mocked the counselors, dismissed the other patients as losers who'd never handled 7 figures. But in his second month, something broke. It happened during a family session. Vanessa came. She didn't say much, just sat across from him, arms folded, eyes hollow. Michael apologized. Not for the drugs or the lies or the cheating, but for forgetting who he was supposed to be. She nodded once, then said, "You were brilliant, Michael, but you were never brave." That night, he cried for the first time since childhood. From that moment, he changed. Slowly, unevenly. He started listening, speaking less, taking notes, reading old journals from his college years. In one entry, he found a line he had written as a senior at NYU. "I want to build something that lasts longer than me." He laughed bitterly at that. By month 4, he began mentoring a younger addict, a 24-year-old who'd lost everything gambling on crypto. Michael told him stories, not of wealth or power, but of failure. The kind that stains your soul, the kind you don't post on LinkedIn. He relapsed once. On a rainy Tuesday, a former colleague mailed him a copy of Forbes featuring a former intern of Michael's who had made partner at a rival firm. Michael spiraled. Stole anxiety meds from the clinic pharmacy. Got caught. Nearly expelled. But the head counselor, an ex-banker named Jonas, sat him down and said, "You think being brilliant gives you permission to be broken. It doesn't. You don't need genius now, Michael. You need humility." That line stuck. Michael spent the rest of his rehab not chasing redemption, but owning his past. When he graduated 6 months later, he stood in front of a small crowd of staff and patients and said, "I had everything and I lost it. Not because I made bad trades, but because I lied to myself. Every day, until I didn't know who I was anymore." If you're sitting here thinking you're too smart to fall, look at me. They applauded. Not because he was a hero, but because he was finally human. And just when the clouds seemed to lift, tragedy came calling again. Jonas, the counselor who had saved him, died of a heart attack 2 weeks later. The news shattered. Michael. He questioned everything. Was this another sign he was cursed? Doomed to destroy everything he touched? He almost didn't show up to his final hearing, but he did. And when the judge asked if he had anything to say, Michael simply replied, "I'm not asking for another chance. I'm asking for the chance to be useful." The judge nodded. No prison, full community service, supervised release, and an opportunity to speak to young professionals at business schools across the state. Not redemption, but a start. Thank you for staying with us this far. Your time means everything. And trust me, the final chapter is the one you won't forget. The auditorium was full but silent, not out of boredom, out of anticipation. A TEDx banner hung behind the podium, red and stark. The speaker was introduced, simply, Michael Grayson, former Wall Street executive, current financial ethics educator. He stepped onto the stage wearing a plain navy suit. No Rolex, no swagger, no smirk, just a man with tired eyes and a calm voice. 15 years ago, he began, I could move markets with a whisper. Today I take the subway to work. The audience chuckled. But I'm happier now, he continued, because I finally understand the value of a life that's not for sale. Michael's speech went viral, not because of some dramatic confession or flashy statistics, but because of his honesty. He didn't glamorize his past. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He talked about addiction, about greed, about the sick satisfaction of beating a system is broken, and then about the guilt that follows. I wasn't born a monster, he told them. I became one by trading integrity for dopamine, day after day, until nothing mattered but the high of winning. After rehab, Michael rebuilt slowly. He rented a modest apartment in Brooklyn. He taught night classes in business ethics. He volunteered at a hotline for financial fraud victims. Most didn't recognize him. Those who did usually stared too long before pretending they didn't. He didn't mind. He wrote a book, The Anatomy of a Fall. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was honest. He got back in touch with Vanessa. They met for coffee, awkward at first. Eventually, she forgave him, not for the affair or the lies or the public collapse, but for not loving himself enough to stop. They didn't get back together. That part was over. But she came to one of his talks and smiled. Michael started mentoring young investors, hungry entrepreneurs, even recovering addicts trying to navigate their first honest paycheck. He told them what no textbook ever does, that success isn't measured in numbers, but in how well you sleep at night. Some listened, some didn't, but he kept talking. In 2021, the SEC formally closed all remaining investigations. His name wasn't cleared, it never would be, but the cloud lifted. Just a little. He still got hate mail, still saw the occasional tabloid story labeling him a con man turned guru, but that didn't define him anymore. What did? The moment a 19-year-old finance student approached him after a lecture, eyes wide, and said, "Thank you. My dad made the same mistakes. He didn't survive. I'm trying to do better." Michael shook his hand, nodded once, and walked outside. It was snowing, soft, quiet, and slow. He pulled out his phone, checked a single stock. Not to trade, just to look. Old habits, then put it away. The last trade he ever made wasn't in dollars or shares. It was in truth. He traded the fantasy of perfection for the burden of reality and the freedom that followed, because sometimes the most powerful move isn't a bet on a market trend. It's betting on yourself to finally stop pretending. And for Michael Grayson, that was the only trade that ever really mattered.